Imagine Havana in the late 1950s. The jewel of the Caribbean wasn't just a tropical paradise, it was a criminal wonderland that made Las Vegas look like a church bingo hall. The mob's Cuban empire stretched across the Malecon, with neon-lit palaces that laundered dirty money through spinning roulette wheels and blackjack tables. Mayor Lansky's Riviera, Santos Traficante's Sans Souci, and Sam Giancana's interests in the Capri Hotel formed a glittering constellation of underworld wealth that operated with the full blessing of dictator Fulgencio Batista, who collected his percentage without asking questions. The numbers were staggering. Each casino cleared between 5 to 10 million annually, over 50 million in combined profits every year. Mob accountants estimate the total investment in these properties exceeded $100 million in 1959. For perspective, that's nearly $1 billion in today's money, all of it flowing freely through criminal enterprises with minimal oversight or taxation. Then came January 1st, 1959. While Americans nursed New Year's hangovers, Fidel Castro and his revolutionary forces marched into Havana. Within weeks, the casino floors that once hosted Hollywood celebrities and wealthy Americans stood empty. Revolutionary soldiers, many just teenagers with rifles, seized control of luxury hotels. Casino safes were emptied, accounts frozen, and MOB representatives given a simple message: leave immediately or face imprisonment. The timing couldn't have been worse for organized crime. They'd just finished pouring millions into renovations and expansions, believing their Cuban paradise would last indefinitely. Meyer Lansky, whose financial genius had built much of the operation, reportedly lost $14 million in the Riviera alone. When combined with the other family's investments, the total approached what would now be $1 billion write-off, with no insurance policy to cover revolutionary expropriation. For once, the notoriously fractious crime families found themselves united. Bosses from Chicago, New York, Miami, and New Orleans, men who typically quarreled over territory and rackets, suddenly shared a common enemy in Castro. More importantly, they shared a burning desire to reclaim their lost Caribbean empire. When John F. Kennedy took office in January 1961, the MOB initially saw possibility. The new administration inherited a CIA plan to overthrow Castro using Cuban exiles trained by American intelligence. For crime bosses, the Bay of Pigs operation represented more than just Cold War strategy. It was their ticket back to their seized properties and frozen bank accounts. Behind closed doors, many of the same mobsters who had allegedly helped Kennedy secure crucial votes in the 1960 election believed they were owed presidential support for the invasion. Their enthusiasm wasn't about democracy or fighting communism. It was about reclaiming their confiscated casinos and re-establishing their money laundering operations. The mob's support for the Bay of Pigs wasn't ideological, it was ruthlessly pragmatic. They viewed the invasion as their only realistic chance to reclaim a gambling empire that had become the cornerstone of their financial operations. Intelligence files indicate several bosses even promised additional funding and manpower for the operation, seeing it as an investment in their future profits. Then came the catastrophe. When exile forces landed at the Bay of Pigs in April 1961, they expected American air support to neutralize Castro's small air force. Instead, Kennedy refused to commit U.S. military forces directly, concerned about Soviet reaction and escalation. The invasion collapsed within days, with most exile fighters captured or killed on the beaches. For the mob, this wasn't just a military failure. It was personal betrayal of the highest order. Newly released transcripts reveal the depth of their rage. Chicago boss Sam Giancana, upon learning Kennedy had abandoned the invasion, exploded to associates. "That son of a bitch will pay." The statement, captured in intelligence files, reflected the collective fury of men who had just watched their last chance to reclaim billions in assets vanish because Kennedy wouldn't commit American air power. The president's decision transformed the relationship between the Kennedy administration and organized crime overnight. The same mob figures who had allegedly helped deliver critical votes in Chicago and West Virginia now saw Kennedy as the man who had permanently sealed off their most profitable territory. Their billion-dollar motive for revenge had crystallized. With With their billion-dollar motive firmly established, the mob still faced a crucial problem. Assassinating a sitting U.S. president requires resources and expertise beyond what even the most powerful crime families possessed. But in the shadows of Washington's corridors of power, an unlikely partnership was forming, one that would provide the perfect assassination framework. By 1960, the CIA had established a top-secret program with an ominous codename, ZR/RIFLE. This classified initiative wasn't designed for intelligence gathering or even covert influence. Its explicit purpose was the assassination of foreign leaders. Fidel Castro topped the list of targets, making the program's objectives perfectly aligned with the mob's burning desire for revenge. What happened next defied conventional wisdom about American institutions. Rather than working to bring down organized crime, elements within the CIA actively recruited the very MOB bosses who had lost their Cuban empires. This unholy alliance formed around a mutual objective, eliminating Castro, but created methodologies and channels that could be redirected toward any target. The financial connections revealed in newly declassified files paint a disturbing picture. CIA officer George Ioannidis transferred $25,000 to an anti-Castro group that maintained direct connections to Lee Harvey Oswald. This payment established a critical financial link between the intelligence agency, violent anti-Castro forces, and the man who would later be identified as Kennedy's assassin. The money trail doesn't prove direct involvement in Kennedy's murder, but it demonstrates how closely these supposedly separate worlds had become intertwined. In parallel operations that further cemented this dangerous partnership, CIA official William Harvey conducted meetings with MOB enforcer John Roselli. Their discussions weren't theoretical. Harvey provided poison pills and weapons, while dangling the restoration of Cuban casinos as incentive for the mob's assistance. The criminal underworld was effectively being armed and trained by America's premier intelligence agency. This collaboration created more than just operational capacity. It established a dangerous precedent. The assassination teams operated with minimal oversight, employing cutouts and intermediaries that ensured plausible deniability for both government officials and mob leadership. If something went wrong, no direct connections could be traced back to those who gave the orders. The alarm bells regarding Oswald were ringing weeks before Dallas. A recently unearthed CIA memo from November 1963 shows an officer flagging serious concerns about Oswald's suspicious visits to Soviet and Cuban embassies in Mexico City. These warnings were dismissed by superiors, representing either catastrophic negligence or something more sinister, deliberate blindness toward a developing plot. What made this alliance particularly lethal was how perfectly complementary their skills proved to be. The mob had decades of expertise in untraceable hits, eliminating targets without leaving evidence or witnesses. The CIA contributed sophisticated intelligence capabilities and, critically, political protection that could shield operations from scrutiny. Together, they formed a lethal apparatus with shared methodology, overlapping personnel, and aligned objectives. Operation Mongoose, a covert CIA-led program against Castro's regime personally authorized by Kennedy himself, provided further operational cover. The president who approved missions targeting a foreign leader could never have imagined he was inadvertently creating the methodology for his own assassination. The techniques, personnel networks, and communication channels established for killing Castro created the perfect framework for targeting Kennedy. The genius of this approach was how it operated entirely in shadows, where accountability disappeared. Both organizations maintained strict hierarchies with compartmentalized information. Orders passed through multiple intermediaries, creating buffers between decision-makers and operators. If investigators ever started pulling threads, they would find only low-level assets with no knowledge of who ultimately authorized their actions. Those carefully constructed layers of deniability weren't just protecting conspirators. They concealed evidence that would shatter the official narrative. While government investigators focused solely on Oswald, ballistic reports told a different story that points to an uncomfortable truth. Kennedy's assassination bears all the hallmarks of a professional mob hit involving multiple shooters. For more than half a century, we've lived with the Warren Commission's tidy explanation: Oswald acting alone, firing 3 shots in just 8.6 seconds from a 6th-floor window with a bolt-action Mannlicher Carcano rifle. This version of events, satisfying in its simplicity, has dominated textbooks and official accounts. But newly declassified files have begun unraveling this carefully crafted narrative thread by thread. Ballistic experts whose reports were previously withheld have challenged the physical possibility of Oswald's shooting timeline. The sequence required not just rapid firing but exceptional accuracy. 3 shots with minimal time for aim adjustment between each trigger pull. For a mediocre marksman like Oswald, this feat approaches the impossible. A KGB memo uncovered in recent file releases noted that during his time in the Soviet Union, Oswald demonstrated poor shooting skills while under surveillance, hardly the profile of someone capable of executing one of history's most precise political assassinations. The acoustic evidence tells an even more damning story. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, concluded there was a high probability that a second shooter fired from the infamous grassy knoll. This finding, previously dismissed by critics, finds powerful corroboration in the newly released witness statements. "I saw smoke from behind the fence on the grassy knoll," stated one Dallas bystander in a previously suppressed testimony. According to accompanying notes, this witness claimed government agents later visited them, demanding silence about what they'd observed. This witness wasn't alone. Multiple spectators reported seeing suspicious activity in this exact location. What makes these accounts particularly revealing isn't just their content, but how perfectly they align with standard mob execution protocols. When organized crime families eliminated high-value targets, they rarely relied on a single shooter. The standard operating procedure involved multiple firing positions to ensure success and create deliberate confusion about the source of gunfire. "In a professional hit, you never depend on one shooter," explained a former FBI organized crime specialist in a confidential assessment from the files. "You create multiple angles of fire to guarantee the target goes down and to scatter evidence across multiple locations." This methodology explains one of the most troubling aspects of the Kennedy assassination: the conflicting witness accounts about the direction of gunfire. Some heard shots from the book depository, others from the grassy knoll. Rather than contradicting each other, these testimonies actually describe the signature technique of a professional mob hit. The conspiracy's final phase, silencing potential witnesses, also followed organized crime's established playbook. FBI records reveal a chilling phone call received at their Dallas field office prior to Oswald's murder. The anonymous caller predicted that Oswald would be killed by Jack Ruby before he could reveal what he knew. This foreknowledge suggests not random violence, but a planned cleanup operation typical of mob hits: eliminate the patsy before he can talk. With each newly released document, the assassination increasingly resembles a precisely choreographed operation rather than the impulsive act of a disturbed loner. The physical evidence at Dealey Plaza, bullet trajectories, timing sequences, and witness accounts aligns perfectly with how MOB bosses eliminated problems: multiple shooters, a designated fall guy, and the swift elimination of anyone who might talk. The elimination of a key witness isn't theoretical. It happened on live television just 2 days after Kennedy's assassination. While Americans watched in horror as Jack Ruby gunned down Lee Harvey Oswald, few realized they were witnessing not a spontaneous act of vengeance, but the final critical phase of a professional mob hit designed to sever the last link to the conspiracy. On November 24, 1963, as police transferred Oswald through the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters, Ruby emerged from the crowd of reporters and fired a single fatal shot into Kennedy's alleged assassin. The nightclub owner later claimed patriotic outrage motivated his actions, a desire to spare Jackie Kennedy the trauma of a trial. But newly declassified telephone records tell a far more sinister story. Ruby's long-distance calling patterns changed dramatically in the months before Kennedy visited Dallas. His telephone activity spiked noticeably, with most calls officially relating to disputes with the American Guild of Variety Artists regarding his nightclub operations. This seemingly innocuous business explanation quickly unravels when examining who Ruby contacted. On October 30th, 1963, weeks before Kennedy's fateful visit, Ruby placed a call to Nofio Pecora, a lieutenant to New Orleans mob boss Carlos Marcello. Though the call lasted less than a minute, its existence established a direct connection between Ruby and one of the country's most powerful crime families. Just prior to the assassination, investigators found this timing highly suspicious, as it indicated contact with organized crime figures at a critical juncture. Even more damning were the calls Ruby made on November 7th and 8th, 1963, to Robert Barney Baker, a known associate of Teamster President Jimmy Hoffa. This connection proved particularly troubling as Hoffa harbored well-documented animosity toward the Kennedy brothers. Attorney General Robert Kennedy's aggressive prosecution of the Union leader had made the Kennedys enemies of both the Teamsters and their mob allies. The fact that Baker later admitted he didn't know Ruby prior to these calls raises serious questions about their purpose and timing. Ruby's relationship with Chicago bail bondsman Irwin Weiner further cemented his organized crime connections. Weiner, who frequently represented mob figures, refused to cooperate with FBI investigators during the Warren Commission investigation, a silence that speaks volumes about the nature of his association with Ruby. While the Warren Commission portrayed Ruby as an emotionally unstable nightclub owner who acted impulsively, these phone records paint a different picture. One of a man with deep connections to organized crime leadership across multiple cities. The call pattern suggests not random outreach, but a coordinated communication strategy months before Kennedy's visit was even announced. Perhaps the most chilling revelation from the declassified files concerns Ruby's health. At the time he murdered Oswald, Ruby was reportedly suffering from terminal cancer. This medical condition made him the ideal candidate for what organized crime would consider a suicide mission, eliminating Oswald with no risk of the trail leading back to mob leadership. Wiretap transcripts indicate Ruby's selection for the Oswald hit was directly tied to his health status, suggesting a cold calculation rather than emotional impulse. The timing of these calls, months before the assassination, rather than in its immediate aftermath, undermines Ruby's claim of spontaneous action. Had Ruby truly been overcome with patriotic grief following Kennedy's murder, we would expect frantic communications in the 48 hours between the assassination and his shooting of Oswald. Instead, the critical communications occurred well in advance, suggesting premeditation and planning. This evidence transforms our understanding of what happened in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. What appeared to be a tragic, impulsive act by a distraught citizen now resembles the final phase of a meticulously orchestrated operation. The cleanup portion of a professional hit, eliminating the one person who could potentially expose the conspiracy. "60 years after the fatal shots in Dallas, the truth is emerging not as a grand government plot, but as something more troubling, a perfectly executed criminal operation." Filmmaker Rob Reiner, who has extensively studied the case, points to what he calls a confluence of rogue elements involving the CIA, the mob, and Cuban exiles. The operation, according to Reiner, was deliberately structured to leave no paper trail, operating outside official government sanction. What makes this revelation particularly chilling is how the assassination combined the mob's vengeful motives with intelligence tradecraft. The conspiracy wasn't orchestrated through formal channels, but through dangerous alliances formed in the shadows of American power. These weren't official government actors, but what experts describe as rogue elements with independent agendas. The newly released documents have prompted renewed calls for a complete re-examination of the case. Many experts now believe the evidence increasingly points toward mafia involvement, transforming our understanding of what happened that November day from a tragedy of lone madness to a calculated criminal execution. The perfect crime may have been hiding in plain sight all along. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Crime Republic, and make sure to tap the bell to see more informative videos like this. Until next time.